Professor Dr. Boaz Ganor doesn't need any introduction. He is, I would say, a world leader in CT, with being the executive director and the founder of the renowned International Institute for Counter-Terrorism, and having organized a multitude of high-level world summit conferences, counterterrorism, a multitude of articles and books which are difficult to all refer to, but now being on sabbatical in the United States and being a visiting professor at Georgetown University. We have been working together since many years. CTED and ICT are long-lasting friends and Coninsx, and we never intend to change a winning team. Very happy that ICT is part of the members of the GRN, Global Research Network, which is another proof of a long-standing cooperation and professional relationship. Boaz, I'm very happy to give you the floor on a theme which is of importance and relevance, the use of AI in countering a phenomenon called lone wolf. I give you the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Michele. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your long-standing friendship, personal and professional friendship, which we are really obliged to thank you on that. And thank you, CTED, for being also in a very close professional relationship with us. I see among us old friends like David Zacharia and others. So it's a pleasure to be at least virtually or on an online platform with you. I really planned and expected to do it in person, but I'm sure that as we will win terrorism at the end of the day, we will win the coronavirus as well. And I will have another opportunity to visit you at the UN building and have a much more personal involvement. As you said, I was asked to speak about the use of AI in counterterrorism, especially in countering the lone wolf phenomenon. This is based on research. Here I see also Chen, my old good friend, joining us. Hi, Chen. I plan to do that, but with your permission, I would like to start with the coronavirus because I think that these days, all of us are counterterrorism experts. We are obliged to try to understand the phenomenon of coronavirus, to find similarities or common denominators between the coronavirus phenomenon and the challenge of countering the coronavirus and counterterrorism and terrorism phenomenon. You will see in a moment that, in my view, this opener of my presentation is very well connected to the subject matter of AI and counterterrorism as we planned from the beginning. So I will start with that and move on to the AI and counterterrorism and the lone wolf phenomenon. First of all, as a counterterrorism expert finding himself in a lockdown, traveling from United States back to Israel, I was asking myself, what is, if at all, are the common denominators between those two phenomena? And the first thing that popped to my mind is that we are practically facing what I would say two pandemic phenomena. Of course, the pandemic phenomenon of the coronavirus, but I would say that global terrorism as such is also a certain type of a global pandemic. Why it's pandemic? Because A, it's contagious. It's moving from person to person. I'm talking about incitement. I'm talking about the modeling phenomenon, the copycat phenomenon in which one terrorist influences another terrorist. It's cross-bordering, like the coronavirus. There is no way of trying to understand terrorism in a local perspective. And you, CTED, more than anybody else in the world, fully understand that the importance of seeing the global picture and from that to conclude what are the local challenges. But at the end of the day, this is all part of one or few big phenomena. So we are talking about threats to the world. We are talking about, which is a common denominator, cross-bordering, contagious, and also I would say that it's facing this, what we call the exponential influence, because one is influence few people that influence other few people, and so on and so forth. So we see a growing scale, exponential growing scale of these two pandemic phenomena. That's a very interesting common denominator. The outcome of those two phenomena, the immediate outcome is fear and anxiety. We are all afraid from coronavirus. We are all afraid from terrorism, that level or the other level of fear. Terrorism is all about terrorizing, spreading fear and anxiety. So coronavirus also spread a lot of fear and anxiety, and both phenomena are posing a threat to government agencies, government ministries, government services, that they might collapse as an outcome of severe eruption of those pandemics, severe eruption of waves of terrorism, severe eruption of coronavirus. Last but not least, common denominator is the impact on economy. We are now in Israel and probably in other states starts to feel the horrendous outcome of the healthcare crisis or the health crisis to the economical arena, becoming a huge economical global crisis. Terrorism, waves of terrorism, severe terrorist attack like 9/11 had an enormous economical impact altogether and put a lot of burden on all the efforts of building better securities, better practices, better policies in counterterrorism. So this is a very interesting common denominator, or common denominators in plural altogether. But we can find also a lot of similarities in reference to countering those two phenomena. And I'm talking about counterterrorism on one hand and countering the pandemic of the coronavirus. First and foremost, in those two cases, governments are facing, and the public at large, are facing what I call in my articles, in my books, the democratic dilemma. Now, what is the democratic dilemma? The democratic dilemma is trying to find the right balance between efficiency in countering this dangerous phenomenon and guarding liberal democratic values at the same time. Like it or not, there is a contradiction between the two. You can be most effective in countering the threat if you disregard liberal democratic values, and you can be most liberal and democrat if you don't afraid, you don't suffer from this phenomenon, you don't expect to suffer from this phenomenon, then you can stick to all your liberal democratic values. The whole, what I call art of counterterrorism, is finding this gentle balance between efficiency in countering this phenomenon and guarding liberal democratic values. Practically, it's all about finding the right checks and balances in comparison to the level of the threat. You can be more effective with putting on yourself checks and balances as you face a large threat like the coronavirus and like terrorism. So the common denominator here is not just that we are facing the democratic dilemma in countering those phenomena. It's also that we have concrete life on stake. You know, I'm speaking with many Israelis, and I ask them, what do you say about all the restrictions, the lockdown? In Israel, they started to use AI in allocating the people which are ill from with coronavirus, or that were ordered to be isolated, and they're looking at them, they're following them with very special technology that until today was used for counterterrorism, and now is being used for these purposes. Why? Because in both cases, you have life on stake. The life, how do you protect the life of the public, the life of the people? How do you prevent the next attack? How do you prevent the next eruption of the coronavirus in another community altogether? When you have a concrete threat for lives, you see that decision makers, politicians, has more tendency to turn a blind eye to some of the liberal democratic values because they want to protect a very important value, and this is the value of life. Again, another very interesting similarity between the challenge of facing those two phenomena. The next thing is also has to do with CTED, and I'm talking about international cooperation. there is no meaning of effective counterterrorism without international cooperation. I think this should be very clear to any seated expert and seated analyst. You cannot afford to be very effective in your counterterrorism efforts in your territory and disregard from the counterterrorism efforts at your neighbors and other countries altogether, because the phenomenon, as I said, is cross-bordering. Now think about the coronavirus. Israel, as I said in the preliminary chat with you, Michele, before we started this lecture, Israel is now quite stable and good condition. But then the question, once we will open our borders and we will allow tourists to come to Israel or allow Israeli tourists to travel to other places, what's the meaning of the success of Israel to stop the coronavirus if other countries have a different level of success? It's important for us to see that other countries would be at least at the same level of success that we are in order really to go to a normal life altogether. Again, the same thing like counterterrorism, international cooperation is crucial. The other thing which is crucial is internal cooperation. Again, you are familiar with CVE, counter-radicalization efforts, and so on and so forth. You understand how crucial it is to find a resilient and cooperative communities, especially the communities that suffer from the phenomenon. I mean, if you really want to have an effective CVE activity or counterterrorism activity, you need to find the members of the community and especially the lay leaders of the community that will voluntarily cooperate in preventing this dangerous phenomenon, in finding those bad seeds and uprooting them because they are a danger to the whole community. We saw it in Israel, we saw it in the United States, in other countries, in the coronavirus, the same phenomenon. What do I mean? We saw that there are specific communities which are more vulnerable to the coronavirus. I'm talking about elderly communities. I'm talking about in Israel was Haredi communities, the ultra-Orthodox Jews, which are close communities, and we saw the eruption of the coronavirus there much more than in the secular open society of Israel altogether. And there was a crucial need to find a joint cooperation between the government institution, municipalities and mayors, private sector, and lay leaders of those communities. So practically, this is another very interesting common denominator altogether. I would conclude that by saying that there is a tension between local observation on the threat and global observation on the threat. You could find states, again, CTED could vouch for it, you can find states that are ready to be, to do whatever is needed in their own territory, but they are not ready to extend that understanding to the global arena and vice versa altogether. So to find the way to combine between global approaches and local approaches or state approaches is crucial in this regard. Now, everything I've said in this comparison has a lot to do with the phenomenon of the lone wolves, because lone wolf is much more contagious phenomenon than other types of what I call organized terrorism. So that actually leads me to the discussion of lone wolves and AI. With your permission, I would like to share a screen with you and to show your presentation on that matter. Okay, do you see the presentation?
We do.
Good. So I wrote an article about this phenomenon. I suggest that you would read that. I'd be more than happy to send it to you. Which started after my friend, which is now watching us, sent me a very interesting article of Henry Kissinger under the title of How the Enlightenment Ends, referring to the phenomenon of the AI. You can imagine from the title that this is a very critical article towards the use of AI. I have to say that I was surprised to learn that Kissinger is still alive and still writing very interesting articles, and I'm very happy he did so because it actually intrigued me to think about the phenomenon and to start my own thinking about it. Now, what Kissinger was saying in his article that artificial intelligence is a technology which is capable of inventing and solving complex and seemingly abstract problems by processes that seem to replicate the thinking of the human mind. That's something that worries Kissinger, because he argues that the AI establishes its own objectives and makes strategic judgment about the future, something that he believed, and many of us believe, that only human beings can do until recently. The search agents and the algorithms acquire capacity to predict the preferences of individual clients. So what we see is a technology which is much more sophisticated, trying to imitate the human mind, and much more capable than the human mind, because they remember every mistake they do, they remember every success they have, and they can extrapolate. If you think about chess play, they can play millions of chess plays and remember all the outcome of each one of those sessions, and that's how they become so efficient in what they do. Now, the problem is, and those are the concerns that he has, first of all, there is the danger that the AI will misinterpret the human instructions. Because what the AI, the machine learning is doing, is you give the guidelines to the machine, and the machine start to check the data based on the guidelines that you gave to the machine. But then the machine corrects itself while it's moving on to process the data, and there might be, at the end of the day, deviation from the guideline that you gave the machine. You gave the machine one instruction, the machine, in order to be more effective and practically becoming more effective, find itself with a deviation, giving another outcome from what you wanted or what you plan to do. Probably the outcome would be more effective and more precise than what you wanted, but still it's different than what you expected to have. Another problem is that the AI may change the human thought processes and human values. Kissinger argued that many of those decision-making processes of the AI has to do with human values, and human values cannot be interpreted to a machine. Furthermore, many of those human values are not agreed by the people themselves. Not all the human beings agree what is moral and what is not moral, for example. And how do you interpret morality to machine learning, to an AI? Very interesting philosophical question. The third concern, which may be the most relevant for our discussion, is when the efficiency of the AI and the machine learning technology becomes so good that the scientists that actually program the algorithms are not able to explain the outcome. Let me give you an example. I actually consult few companies, including AI companies, research and development in different parts of the world. One of those companies actually are working on CCTVs, and what they do with AI, they today developed algorithms that can tell you that there is going to be an attack, not in 2 seconds, but 4 minutes or 5 minutes before the attack. 2 seconds, it's quite easy, because if you see somebody that is doing a movement which is stabbing, well, today we have a lot of video analytics that can tell you there is going to be a stabbing, but you cannot prevent it. When you have the ability to analyze 5 minutes before the attack, when you see the attacker in a different street walking to a target, and to identify it from a crowd, that's almost science fiction. But then in the preliminary analysis that we did, it seems that it's working based on CCTV's videos of terrorist attacks altogether. So after one of those experiments, I've asked the scientists and I said, look, it seems that it works. Can you explain to me how the machine understands that? Is it something in the way that the perpetrator is walking? Is he winking in his eyes? Is he signing something, looking towards it? We have no clue. The machine actually found a way to identify that. We don't know how. Kissinger says that when it reaches that type of efficiency, it becomes very dangerous and problematic. Now, let's go back to the lone wolf phenomenon. I think some of you already saw this slide. Practically, I suggest to differ between three types of perpetrators. The lone wolves, again, I still use the term lone wolves, although most of the experts around the world, security services, don't like the term. Many would argue that the lone wolf there is no such a thing as a lone wolf, because most of the lone wolves, although individual attackers are being inspired by terrorist organizations, they attribute themselves, they refer them to themselves as if they are members of this or the other organization, they support, all true. But I still insist to use the term lone wolf, and you know that I'm a freak of definitions, so the definition that I use for a lone wolf is an individual attacker which has no operational ties to a terrorist organization. Meaning, he might be inspired, he might refer to himself as a member of the organization, but he was never recruited, trained, or getting any operational support from the terrorist organization. So that's the lone wolf type of attacks. And we can also, by the way, differ between different types of lone wolves. One of the most dangerous lone wolves, we'll talk about it, is the spontaneous lone wolf. The spontaneous lone wolf is so dangerous because when he's waking up in the morning of the attack, he still doesn't know that he's going to commit an attack. This is an urge that comes while he's driving his car or walking in the street, he's picking up a knife or a screwdriver, and he conducts the attack. Very difficult to deal with. We'll talk about it a lot in a moment. The second type of attacks is what I call the independent network. The independent network is so-called a group of lone wolves. It's a contradiction in term. It's a group of lone wolves because this is more than one person. It could be 2, 3, 4, 5, or a small group that have been radicalized together. And one day decided to commit the attack without any operational ties to a terrorist organization. That's why I refer to that as a separate group and not a terrorist cell altogether. The third type of attacks, it's what we all know as traditional or organized terrorism. This is a terrorist cell of a terrorist organization. It encapsulates a cell of members of the organization that have been recruited, trained, and sent to their mission by the organization. Our focus in this discussion is on the first group, the lone wolves, those that doesn't have operational ties to a terrorist organization. And we need to understand that when we are talking about the lone wolf, intelligence had a huge problem with that. By the way, this is the article that I wrote, Artificial or Human, a New Era of Counterterrorism Intelligence. And yes, we are talking about a new era of counterterrorism intelligence. And why? Because the intelligence, the traditional intelligence, finds itself incapable of dealing with lone wolves. I'm generalizing here, but what do I mean by that? That it's incapable. When we talk about traditional intelligence, we are talking mainly about human and comment. Human intelligence. You have an agent in the organization who tells you what they are planning to do. Communication intelligence, wiretapping, computer tapping, and so on and so forth. The common denominator of human and comment is the fact that you have at least two people, probably more than two, that share among themselves the secret of the attack. So you have a discourse, you have a discussion, and you intercept the discussion with your agent in human or with your wiretapping in common. That's how intelligence works for ages. This has no meaning when you are dealing with an individual attacker who doesn't share his secret with anybody. Everything starts and ends with the sick mind of one person. Intelligence becomes irrelevant. Here I give some quotes from Colonel Y. That's the way he refers to himself in an article that was published in Hebrew. And he was saying traditional intelligence was facing a hopeless situation. And that's exactly this situation that I referred to. This was a sense of crisis. They found themselves irrelevant. The intelligence agencies find themselves irrelevant. And we understood, he says, that terrorism carried out by individual attackers, the manner in which intelligence had been operating over the past few decades was not sufficient. That triggered the revolution, if you wish. There was a need for a revolution, and the revolution was based on what? It was based on a large, or would say huge development of AI technology in the civilian arena, especially with companies that deals with marketing, with economical aspects, business, and so on and so forth. What we saw there is a huge development and rapid development of AI technologies for civilian purposes, gathering huge data and analyzing that, analyzing the huge database for their purposes. That gave the ability to those technological companies to know almost everything about everybody. Add to that, that since this is a developing phenomenon, developing arena, there was and still is, I would argue, a regulatory lacuna in trying to monitor that, in trying to say what is right and what is wrong in doing with this type of technology. Going back to the lone wolf phenomenon, Israel has suffered from the lone wolf phenomenon for generations, but the biggest wave and the recent wave was between 2015 to 2017, in which we had over those 3 years, over 700 cases of lone wolf attacks in Israel. Those attacks were constructed, or the modus operandi of those attacks were different types of modus operandi, from sabotage, stoning, Molotov cocktail, a lot of stabbing, vehicle ramming, even bulldozing. We had a vehicle ramming with a bulldozer, shooting at, and IED bombings. What we didn't see, lone wolves, only organized terrorism was suicide attacks. And I yet didn't see lone wolves conducting, under the definition that I use, conducting suicide attacks. That's a very interesting operative observation, because the meaning of it, that if a police officer see a person who is stabbing people all around and he's strapped with a suicide belt, probably, I would say almost for sure, this is a phony suicide belt that is meant only to deter the police officer and the people from being engaged with this lone wolf. So I would like to quote the current head of the Israeli security agency, the Israeli Shabak, Nadav Argaman, who was saying that the ISA, the Israeli security agency, has made, that's the term that he's using, a quantum leap in its effort to locate and thwart the lone terrorist. He didn't say it. I interpret that by integrating AI, machine learning, big data technology to that. The ISA has invested, and that's he's saying, heavily in technological powers, in learning system and artificial intelligence. In another statement of the Israeli Security Agency, they say that this ability of integrating AI and integrating new technologies to their counterterrorism efforts gave them the ability to shift, to create a transition from intelligence utilizing to intelligence forecasting. That's the best thing that can happen to intelligence agency, that they have the ability not to analyze in a retrospective point of view what happened, what could have been done different and so on, but to be, or to be able to conduct intelligence forecasting and to thwart terrorist attacks before they occur. And the ISA was saying that the IDF, the ISA, and the police cooperated together, and they have created the ability to identify Palestinians who have been defined as having the potential to carry out terrorist attacks. What they do, they are monitoring social networks, media outlets, databases, and so on and so forth. Now I'm again zooming out from our discussion, going back to speak about the lone wolf phenomenon for one moment before going back to the AI. What differ between a terrorist and a criminal? Practically, they do the same. They kill, they arson, they extort. But what makes a terrorist different from just a regular criminal is the fact that he's being motivated by ideological grievances. If I would see it in their own eyes, by altruistic grievances. He is ready to sacrifice his life for a greater cause. I just published an article last week. I also suggest that you would read it. It was published at ASPI in Australia, in which I compare the manifesto of Brenton Tarrant, the white extremists, terrorist in Christchurch. I compare the manifesto of his to the manifestos of Islamist jihadists, and I find so many similarities. The first similarity that I find there is the concept of altruism. A terrorist sees himself as an altruist. It's so crucial for the terrorist to publish that, because without publishing his motivation, his grievances, his altruism, there is no meaning of the attack. He's just a regular criminal. So regular organized terrorists for generation are not worried of publishing their grievances. You know why? Because after the attack, even if they will die, even if they will be apprehended, after the attack, their manifestos, their videos, their leaflets will be published by the organization that sent them to their mission. They know that their motivation will be published. Lone wolves doesn't have this luxury. Lone wolves need to publish their grievances, their motivation, their ideology, their altruism before the attack occurs, because most probably after the attack, they either will be killed or apprehended. That's why the writing is on the wall, and the wall is the wall of the Facebook. The wall is the wall of the social networks. Here you can see a few examples of lone wolves attackers in Israel that wrote in their social network activity that they have a plan to conduct the attack. Fadi Alun, for example, writes, "In the name of Allah, the merciful and compassionate, or Allah, today I decided to achieve shuhada." That's a $1 million intelligence warning, if you wish. Shuruk Dawayat discussing with her alleged mother over the internet, telling their intention to become a shahida, to become a suicide attacker, the way that she sees it, not the way that I describe a suicide attacker. And so on and so forth. You can see it over and over again. Going back to the AI, and what we see, again, according to Nadav Argaman, the head of the Israeli Security Agency, the success is outstanding. There was a huge decrease in the numbers of lone wolves attacks starting from 2015, that was 163, moving to 2016, 108, and 2017, 54. And since then, there was a huge decline of the wave of terrorism. Following the adjustment of intelligence operational response in 2017, he argued that they located more than 1,100 potential lone terrorists. Let me refer to the term potential in a moment. In 2016, 2,200. About 250 attacks had been foiled in the first half of 2018. This is an outstanding success, no doubt about that whatsoever. And this is being done by the Information System Technology Division of the ISA, of other agencies, using computer vision, speech recognition, data mining, neural language processing, machine learning, big data, and neural network algorithms. All of that together create this AI enormous capabilities. I would like to conclude by talking about the dilemmas that this is bringing. And first and foremost is the democratic dilemma in counterterrorism, which we already referred to that, the tension between efficiency in counterterrorism and guarding liberal democratic values. At the same time, Lieutenant Colonel T that also I quote him from Hebrew, was saying that military action, which is based on technology and machines, requires a high level of awareness of actions, ethical aspects. This is important to emphasize that, especially because that effective work of intelligence agencies using big data might breach the privacy on a large scale. We saw it on counterterrorism. We see today, as I said before, in reference to the coronavirus, not just in reference to potential terrorists, but also the public at large in Israel and other states altogether. And the question that are being raised, going back to Kissinger, Kissinger was talking about the inability of humanity to agree on definitions that has to do with moral terms. So we didn't agree, as we all know, of the term, what is terrorism altogether. We didn't agree what is a lone wolf altogether. And I would add to that, what is a potential lone wolf? When you're saying that you apprehended X number of potential lone wolves, what's the meaning of potential lone wolf? Let me double click on that for one moment. When I analyze terrorism, I'm saying terrorism, or the terrorism equation, holds two factors: motivation, multiple operational capability. Only when a certain group of people has motivation to attack, an operational capability that allows them to materialize the motivation, then a terrorist attack would occur. In lone wolf attacks, there is no meaning of capability, because the capability is a screwdriver. The capability is a knife from the kitchen. The capability is the car keys. So the only thing that you have is trying to identify the motivation of the person. But the problem, if you refer to every person that is full with hatred, and maybe even thinking about attacks, if you refer to that as a potential terrorist, you have a problem, my friend. So I would argue that we need to define terrorism, we need to define lone wolf, but we need to define what's the meaning of potential lone wolf altogether. Because from my perspective, if you put, surround the West Bank and put in a siege, I don't know how many millions there altogether, believe me, you prevented X millions of potential lone wolves altogether, because most of them hate the Israelis and would want to conduct an attack. That's not a measure of success for that purpose. And that's the second question. How do you measure success? Can you measure success in the number of detainees? Let me add to that another problem that it's not necessarily has to do with AI, but it's connected to AI. And this is the question of sting operation. Now, you know, I was giving a talk in ICT International Conference a few years ago, talking about lone wolves. And I was explaining that the intelligence has a huge problem of identifying the lone wolves and prevention of those attacks. And after me was a very dear friend of mine speaking. I'm talking about Brian Jenkins. And Brian was standing there and said, Boaz, I don't know what are you talking about. I've analyzed the lone wolf attack cases in United States, and there is 99% success of intercepting those lone wolves. The intelligence succeed. So I'm being Israeli, I cannot stand that he was refuting my argument. And I was standing immediately and I said, dear Brian, I have one question. How many of those interceptions in United States of lone wolves were sting operation? You know the term sting operation, meaning it's an FBI agent that actually maneuver, interview a person online, other ways. Would you be ready to commit an attack? If I'll give you a gun, would you use it? And so on and so forth. The answer was 99% of the 99% were sting operations. In my view, that's a problem. That's a problem that needs to be solved, and it's tightly connected to the AI phenomenon. Moving on to another dilemma, and the dilemma is the fact that the actual creates a new reality in which totally new questions are being asked. When we are talking about AI and counterterrorism and other fields, it's all about asking the right questions. And the AI allegedly can give you all the answers you want. Just ask the right question. The problem is that sometimes those questions might be biased, ethnically biased, and biased in any other way. I think that the one who saw that was Facebook. When Facebook created algorithms of AI in order to intercept activity, online activity of Islamist jihadists, they forgot that the attack might come from white supremacists like Christchurch, because they were ethnically biased. So that's another challenge that you need to bear in mind when you're building those algorithms all together. And Kissinger was saying, the other concern of Kissinger is when the scientists are not able to explain the rationale of the conclusions of the AI. That creates an enormous moral dilemma. And I would suggest that if the scientists cannot deal with that, cannot explain that, maybe this is not something, not a technology that can be used in order to increment people as a lone source of information. So what are the recommendations? And I'm concluding with that. My recommendation is to develop guidelines for the use of AI in counterterrorism. This requires the work, the joint work of computer scientists, security analysts, terrorist experts, terrorism experts, strategists, jurists, philosophers, law experts, and others together. It's not enough just to have law experts or just to have security agencies working with that. You need philosophers here. You need political scientists here that will bring to the table their observation. This is too complicated to be dealt with one discipline altogether. The AI technology combined with big data should be treated as a mean of mass surveillance and tapping. And it should be built on a prior approval by a judge. It's not the fact, as many are arguing, that because we are talking about big numbers, because we don't have the concrete identity of every person, then there is no problem of collecting the information and so on and so forth. There is a problem of privacy. There is a problem of wiretapping and surveilling on many people altogether, and that be treated as such. There should be monitored, regulated process by the judicial and legislative branch. You cannot leave it just to the government or the security agency. You need to have a control of the parliament and the legislative branch on the process of the use of the AI in counterterrorism. Each database which is being used should be assessed in reference to those challenges and dilemmas of privacy and other liberal democratic values. The use of the AI and big data technology to prevent terrorism should be avoided when the results of the algorithm cannot be explained. I already explained that concept. When you build the algorithm, you have to minimize as much as possible false negative and false positive altogether. You need to be very cautious not to build algorithm based on cultural or ethnic bias. You need to identify those potential lone wolf based on a concrete scale. The scale that I suggest is the ticking bomb situation. Where does the preparation of an attack becomes a potential lone wolf attack based on the ticking bomb situation? I don't have the time to elaborate on that. I'm now writing an article that explains that. The incrementation of potential terrorists should be only when there is additional supporting incriminatory evidence. It's not enough just that the machine pointed out that that person is dangerous, is planning an attack or whatever is doing. The number of alleged foiled attacks should not be the measurement of success. You need to find other measurements of success of the use of AI in counterterrorism. Administrative detention or any other administrative punishment should not be used when you increment people based on the AI information. Why? Because at the end of the day, you need a human being, you need a judge to go over the material and decide there is enough material to increment this specific person. And last but not least, AI system should be only supporting decision-making machines and should never be autonomous decision-making systems. It should help you in analyzing the threat. It should help you in trying to identify the attacker, but this is not a decision-making system. Sometimes, because it's so efficient, you see that experts, that security agencies tend to rely on the recommendation of the machine is if this is a decision by itself. So I'm sorry that I took too much time of yours, but I wanted actually to cover most of the aspects of the phenomenon. We don't hear you, Michele. You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm pushing twice on the button, which is not a nice idea. Thanks so much, Boaz. Inspiring as always. We're really used to that high level of inspiration. You not only set the scene and give us a look with the lens of the common denominators, terrorism, COVID, the similarities, and the absolute need for international cooperation if you want to tackle one and or the other. You went into lone wolves and gave us a definition. I know that it's your really strong point where you are not always at the same wavelength with all the others. But again, what you always have done is when you use machines, when you use AI, you need a definition, you need to create clarity. And that's what you absolutely have been doing in using AI to counter lone wolves, also underlined the challenges, made recommendations, and finally final conclusions.